You are listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with Steve Worsley, the toxic mold expert and your number one source for mold consulting and mitigation in the USA. Let's dive into a brand new episode. Before we get started on this episode, here's a not so short disclaimer. While all attempts have been made to verify the content provided in this podcast, neither the podcaster or the producers assume any responsibility for errors, omissions, or alternative interpretations of the issues discussed here. All information stated in this podcast is the opinion of Steve Worsley. Steve Worsley is a mold specialist with over 25 years of experience in the construction and mold industry. The Toxic Mold Podcast is for information sharing purposes only. The views expressed are those of the podcaster and his alone. These views should not be taken as expert instruction or commands. While there may be references to medical conditions and symptoms, all podcast episodes are the opinion of Steve Worsley, and any medical questions or concerns shall be addressed with the appropriate licensed medical professional or professionals. As the podcaster refers to different mold types, please be aware that Steve Worsley is not a microbiologist, and questions concerning mold specifics should be answered by the appropriate professional. Steve isn't, nor does he offer any legal advice. For any legal advice, you must speak with a lawyer. The listener is 100% responsible for his or her own actions. You can check out Steve's books on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and search for author Steve Worsley. You can also take Steve's courses on Udemy or Skillshare, and you can find out more about those at cnccontractorservices.com. Now, let's get to the episode.
In today's episode, we have the pleasure of interviewing Heather Sunderland. Heather is a functional health coach. Heather offers one-on-one coaching, group coaching, and health reset strategies. Here's Heather's bio. Heather's journey of undiagnosed Lyme and mold for 27 years is what brings her to our podcast. Heather's mission is to help motivated individuals reclaim their health from chronic conditions like Lyme, mold, autoimmune diseases, and SIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. Through regenerative nutrition and detoxification principles, Heather will guide you in reducing pain, inflammation, increasing energy, focus, and clarity, improving sleep, digestion, and achieving a healthy weight while decreasing the body's parasite, viral, bacterial, heavy metal, and toxic loads using food and herbal remedies. Heather's goal is to provide hope to those who may have struggled. Heather believes that your body is capable of healing once given the right tools. In today's episode, Heather will talk about her mold journey that she fought. Also, will bring up a great point that I stress all the time. She talks about the toxins in your body and refers to it this way: once your bucket is full, you will get sick. We will then talk about detoxing, and Heather will explain how everyone will react differently, and she says you must listen to your body and trust what it's telling you. As we wrap up, Heather says that you must dedicate 90 days to detox properly. Heather has a free discovery call so that both of you can see if you're a good fit for each other. I will post all the links to get in touch with Heather in this podcast description. On behalf of myself and all of our listeners, we'd like to thank Heather for taking the time to do an interview to educate all of us. Now, let's get to the episode. Hello, you're listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with myself, Steve Worsley, and our listeners are getting kind of spoiled lately. They don't have to just hear from me, but we have a wonderful guest on today. Her name's Heather Sunderland, and she has gone through her own mold journey for like 20 some odd years, and now she's a functional health coach. So I wanted to bring her on so she could kind of explain to our listeners what she went through, what to expect, and what she can do for these listeners. So welcome to the Toxic Mold Podcast, Heather. How are you?
I'm great, Steve. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you coming on. It's, like I said, it's always great to have guests because people want to hear the health side of it. And obviously you focus more on the coaching side, but you are very well educated and understand the health side. Plus, like I said, you've been through it. So tell our listeners, let's start out with your story. And you were in, I don't want to say it this way, but you were in pretty bad shape. You were in a wheelchair for a while, had a walker, but just tell our listeners what your story is.
Yeah, I'm going to try to make it short and sweet, unless you find there's something you want me to elaborate on. I mean, growing up, I had a lot of childhood illnesses, asthma, irritable bowel. And then about the time I was 30, I started to have daily acute pain, neuropathy. It just got worse and worse as the years went on. My ability to walk got worse. At 35, I stopped working. I had had a private practice as a dietitian and a diabetic educator, and nobody really knew what was wrong. They were labeling me with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome. Over time, I was put on a lot of medications. I didn't know any better. I didn't know what to do. I had really chronic acute pain on a daily basis, very severe neuropathy. Even went as far to implant a spinal cord stimulator in my back to block the pain to the brain so that I could walk a little bit better. At 51, I was diagnosed with Lyme. So that was part of the issue. I had undiagnosed Lyme. We treated the Lyme holistically. I improved, but I never really got well. And we moved across the country to Arizona to be in a one-story house because my walking was very poor. I went to health coaching school while I was sick, trying to hope to figure out what was going on. And I didn't really figure it out. But when I had graduated school, I was just getting sicker and sicker. COVID came and the Lyme resurfaced and I developed Graves' disease and mono all in the same month. And I was a mess. I was just a mess. I was awake for 72 hours at a time. I was down to about 10 foods that I could eat, diagnosed with SIBO. And I was eating healthy and thinking, I'm doing all this stuff right. Why would the Lyme resurface? And another coach reached out to me and said, I think you're being exposed to mold or you've been exposed to a water damaged building. I think you have chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And I had no idea what that was. We were in a new build in the desert. Didn't know you had to test a house for mold, let alone a new build. So I went through getting blood work. And it showed I had chronic inflammatory response syndrome. It showed I could not detox mycotoxins from mold, could not detox Lyme biotoxins. And when I told my parents this, they're like, oh, your childhood bedroom had Stacky, when you were 3 years old. I'm like, well, gosh, I was asthmatic when I was 3. And it was like all starting to click, all the issues I had, the chronic constipation. And then I got bit by a tick and of course I got Lyme. I couldn't detox the mold out of my body. And then all the drugs I had been on those years added to the toxic burden of my body because we weren't treating what was wrong. We were just trying to manage my symptoms. And I got up to being on 20 drugs for over 20 years, trying to manage all the issues that were developing because I was so toxic and I did not know. And it really started, I would say, with mold, right? Not knowing there was mold in my childhood bedroom. And then our house that we lived in Pennsylvania had a water leak. And we didn't handle it properly. We had a water heater burst and we just wet dry vacked it up. That was the end of that. And actually all of us, our whole family developed health issues after that point. And so it was really the mold that affected all of us. And then our new house in Arizona, we tested and we had Stacky and Aspergillus niger, I think it was. And it was determined it was from building material. And we never did find the building material that was affected. I was able to heal in that house. The levels were low. But, some people don't like any kind of Stacky in their home. And I always tell clients, everybody's different, what they can handle being exposed to. But I stayed in that house. We did stuff to bring the general mold levels down, but we did not bring the Stacky or Aspergillus niger on the did not come down with what we did because we didn't find the source.
Right. And that's, for our listeners, we talk about this. I have a client actually right now that is new construction and there was a mold issue in the crawl space, but then the framing materials, like just some of the wall studs just have mold on it. And, is that a big deal? I don't know. It's not up to me to decide. It's up to the occupants of the home. But once again, let's touch on and I call them mold sensitive people. Is it about 25% of the population?
Yeah, 25% can detox mycotoxins that they're exposed to. And so if you're in an environment that has mold and the byproduct is mycotoxins, that's what really makes us ill, is not the mold, it's what they're giving off.
Right.
Those are the people who get sickest sickest first. But even in my household, we all don't detox mold. And I presented much more classically with neuropathy, nerve pain. I was getting electric shocks. I had insomnia. I had trouble walking. My limbs got heavy, where my husband and son had totally different labels in traditional medicine with what was wrong with them.
Right.
But once you start peeling away those layers of illness and addressing the toxicity in the body, which mold is what's tipping most people's buckets, but mold is affecting other things in their body.
Explain to our listeners, when you say tip in the bucket, explain to them just kind of that theory as to, the bucket fills up and obviously at some point your body just can't handle. Kind of address that when you said it tipped the bucket.
Sure. I mean, we're all exposed to stuff every day that we don't think about in the air, in the water, in the foods we eat. I live off a golf course in Arizona, right? They're spraying the golf course with pesticides. So I'm getting some of that because I'm right off of it. Never even thought about it. The hair care, the skin care we use in our lifetime, our body has to process those toxins. And God designed our body to do that, to detox our body. But I think we're just being exposed to so much today that people will start to develop symptoms when the load in their body gets high enough. Sometimes it's not even overflowing, because if you're toxic, any kind of toxicity, whether it's from mycotoxins or other toxins like heavy metals, high bacterial viral load, all of that creates inflammation in the body. And that inflammation for one person can cause, their blood sugar not to be regulated well. And in someone else, it can lead to colitis, or Crohn's disease. It's sort of interesting how people can be very affected very differently, whether it's mycotoxins or just overall toxicity.
Exactly.
But I have found everybody I work with who has chronic health problems, toxicity is at the root of it. And then us making sure that their environment is safe is critical. I mean, most of the people who find me, I'm working with mold and Lyme 90% of the time. They find out working with me that they're in mold, and they didn't know that to begin with, because a lot of times, right, this, people don't see it. They don't even, my house, you didn't see it, you didn't smell it.
Right.
It was a brand new house. So yeah, it's quite an interesting rabbit hole, as you know, to go down.
Exactly. It's one of the most common things we hear. It's not my home. And I get it. It's like admitting your child did something wrong at school when the teacher's calling you. Naturally you want to say, hey, no. And it's the same thing with the home. I have a question though, just out of curiosity, as far as people that were like yourself exposed at childhood, how often do we see those people as they age? It's still because of that exposure. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think when I work with people who are my age and older, we're dealing with their whole past of toxins, right? So the longer they've been exposed to mold, the higher level, right? I think we don't know the levels in my previous environments. I'm just thinking it was probably a low level over time that just to a point that it built up so much my body couldn't handle it, and I got sicker and sicker. But when we have those symptoms, they're warning signs that the body is trying to tell us something's wrong. A lot of us will say, oh, I've got brain fog, it's just part of getting older. I don't believe that to be true.
Right.
There's an underlying root. And if you want to address the underlying root, we have to look at our environment in our home, which isn't, as you know, just mycotoxins. It's also can be bacteria from water damage, endotoxins. Yep. But we have to look at, is there a history of water damage in the home? And people don't want to go down that road because financially it's scary to think my home's making me sick, and then, oh my gosh, what am I going to do if I find out it's my home? And when you're sick, if you have mold toxicity or chronic inflammatory response syndrome or Lyme, it's just overwhelming to try to go, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I went through that rabbit hole in my head before we tested, and I've just learned, and I tell this to clients, don't go there. You know what I mean? Make one decision about what you feel comfortable moving forward with. If that's testing your home, then you wait until you get the results to decide how you're going to move forward once you see what's, before you. But worrying about it is only going to stress your immune system and stress you out and not help your body or your nervous system in that situation.
Exactly. So explain to our listeners, you're not feeling well. Someone like you, obviously, there was a lot of symptoms. Once you figure out, obviously, whatever it is, whatever toxin it is, explain to them as far as the detox process. Because a lot of times my clients, which obviously, I'm on the building side of it, but there's a major fear that it's going to make you really, really sick to go through detox. And explain to our listeners kind of what steps they should expect.
Okay. Well, and everybody's different. I mean, most people do feel worse before they feel better. It really depends on people's buckets and their bodies and their age and their resiliency. But it's very important when we're trying to pull toxins out of the tissue and get it, out of the body, that we prepare the body to do so. And we don't just take a binder that's going to bind toxins, but that we make sure that your detox pathways are open and ready to handle those toxins. And that's going to decrease your symptoms. It doesn't mean you're not going to have symptoms. I'm really clear about that. But symptoms are a normal part of healing. And I don't want people to be afraid of it, because there's a lot you can do to support your body when you're having those symptoms. And if you know it's normal, and there's nothing wrong, then what can we do to support you? Do we need more binder? Do your pathways need more support? Do you need some herbal support for inflammation? Everything I try to do is using things that are natural, whole food, organic, herbs, food binders that are whole food. I'm open to, there are other binders out there on the market that are not whole food or that are prescription. I'm open to them. If somebody needs them, I just find it's gentler to use food to bind, or to use Cellcore or certain products that are more whole food related to bind, because they nourish as they bind. But we have to make sure you're pooping at least once a day. People in mold, often bowels and constipation are really common. So we want you going at least once a day, and eventually that will increase to 2 times a day, 3 times a day, 4 times a day. It just depends on the person. We want to make sure the lymph is supported, whether that's herbally or doing things like dry brushing, lymph massage, lymph herbs, a vibration plate. There's so many different options, and you don't need to do all of them. But our lymph needs to be supported, because that's the sewer system of the body. And if the lymph is congested, your toxins are going to be recirculated, before they ever get a chance to leave, through the lymph, and then through the bowels, and then through the kidneys and the urine. I use a regenerative approach, like I said, using food and herbs really deeply as medicine. And I combine my functional knowledge as well. But kidneys are, a part of our body getting rid of waste. So a lot of times in the regenerative approach, we will support the kidneys filtering with herbs for the kidneys and the bladder. And then the liver and gallbladder. Everybody's a little bit different. If they need liver, gallbladder support, castor oil packs are something that are really easy for people to do. And a lot of people, mold hits the liver really hard. And I was exposed a long time. So I had to do a lot of work to repair my liver. So it wasn't just about supporting my liver for me to heal, because I was sick from the age of 30 to 57, 58. I'm 59 now. But my body had to go through organs really repairing and rebuilding from how much exposure they had over such a long time. People who were exposed to, a short amount of time, a year, they may bounce back a lot quicker than somebody who's older and been exposed, their whole lifetime to mold. And people have to understand we're peeling away an onion. But those are the major organs. The skin is a detox organ as well, and so are our lungs. So breath work and breathing can help, with detox. But I find lymph, liver, kidneys, bowels are where I start. The other stuff we can add in. And of course, for people to heal, if they're in mold, a lot of times there's nervous system dysregulation. So people can't heal when their nervous system's in fight or flight. So if someone presents to me that they're in nervous system dysregulation, we have to address calming the nervous system down, and sometimes, getting out of the environment if that's part of the cause of the nervous system dysregulation, because you can't heal when you're in fight or flight.
Exactly. And that's where what you do is so important. I think I already mentioned it earlier, but sometimes we just need somebody to kind of push us along, and we need a coach. But when we did our discovery call, you had mentioned something about muscle testing. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. And I asked my wife about it. She's like, oh, yeah, that's a thing. And I'm like, I've never heard of that. So can you explain to our listeners what it is and why and how you use it? Not everybody can do it. It's for special people.
I need to be better at explaining it. Muscle testing, a lot of chiropractors do it. The word is applied kinesiology, where they're using usually muscle strength. Like if you go into a chiropractor's office in person, they'll put your arm out and they might have you hold in a supplement. If they can push your arm down, and that's a weak response. And if the arm can't go down, that's a strong response. So even if they're touching organs like your thyroid and you get a weak response, that's a sign your thyroid needs help. It needs some support. And then they can muscle test what support the thyroid wants or what support the liver wants or the adrenals want. I do the muscle testing virtually using a technique called the O-ring technique. So I'm still using muscle response, strong or weak. I'm just using my own muscle when I do it. And I always start with a control that my name's Heather, and that's my yes. For you, nobody's really seeing this. And when my fingers go weak, that's my no. So if I said, is my name Steve, I can feel my fingers go weak right away. So I use it with clients. I do some unusual things because my journey was so long and I was sick so long. I will actually muscle test people's loads because I find health comes down to how much mold or mycotoxins is in their body, but what about other toxins like heavy metals, parasites, viruses, bacteria, and just general toxins. So I will muscle test for all of those things on a discovery call with clients because I can tell right away from the muscle testing, like if somebody's load of parasites, we do 0 to 10, 10 being the highest. If their load's a 9, I know we need to work on parasites and it's a priority. And I can muscle test that as well, but I can see it without doing a lot of expensive testing. Now, most of the time when people find me, they've already had all the testing done and they're not getting better. And I just find for people to get well, whether it's mold or other chronic conditions, we have to address all those things. We have to address all those loads in the body for inflammation to come down. And we have to address opening up detox pathways. And what I did to heal was a little unusual. I ate very alkaline to bring down inflammation, and I learned how to eat to detox. And so I teach clients who want to learn how to do that. If you want to really hone in on your food and your diet, that we can eat to detox. And it's never about perfection. We don't have to be perfect. But I was so sick that I was very motivated to do whatever I was told to do. And I met some regenerative coaches who had mold and SIRS, and they were using the regenerative approach. And I was trying a lot of the holistic approaches out there by naturopaths and shoemaker. Nothing was shifting. After months and months and months of treatment and 3 days on the regenerative approach, I started to see shifts of my diet, my gut healing, and my diet expanding. And so but I did have detox symptoms. I had detox symptoms my entire journey. Now I'm a little unusual because I was sick for so long, right? So I don't want people to think I can't predict what someone's journey is going to look like. We're not in control of that. We're not in control of how long it takes, but it's not uncommon for it to take 2 years for all our blood work and everything to come back to normal. But a lot of people within a month to 90 days, if they're doing the right approach, they're going to see things shift in how they're feeling. Better sleep, better digestion, less brain fog. But they are going to have some symptoms along the way, right, of things leaving the body. And it just depends if they're detoxing mildly, moderately, deeply. But I teach people how to speed it up, how to slow it down with food and what we're doing.
That's interesting because, when I hear you talk about food, it just brings up, it's kind of a dumb question, but simple question. Is there certain foods, let's just say if it's mold, that are not good, like yeast or stuff like that?
There's still controversy over certain things, but we want to avoid foods that are either cross-contaminated with mycotoxins. So like coffee can be cross-contaminated, nuts and seeds can be cross-contaminated, grains can be cross-contaminated. Chocolate, is at risk. So, and you don't want to be eating foods that have visible, molds on them. Now, in other areas of how to eat, like to detox for mold, there's a lot of controversy. People will say carnivore, paleo, keto. For me to heal, I did the exact opposite. I just ate fruits and vegetables and ate very, very alkaline. And fruits are the highest way of detoxing. And I had terrible candida, and my candida left on its own. So I'm creating this internal environment in clients that their internal environment is more alkaline. Not your stomach. stomach, where your stomach acid is, but the rest of the body, as it becomes more alkaline, illness can't thrive. And I've experienced parasites dying. I've experienced bacteria and viruses dying and leaving the body. And I'm not doing anything. I'm not taking something to kill them. I'm eating in a way that I'm not feeding them processed food. I'm not feeding them acidic food. But when we do that, it helps us with detox as well. And it brings down inflammation very quickly. So it doesn't mean you have to give up meat. I really teach people, listen to your body. I was keto, and it took a little time for my gut to heal in this process. And as it healed, I was able to eat more and more fruit, and fruit was a huge part of my healing. I did like 3 months of all fruit, totally not hungry. I used a superfood shake to get my micronutrients and some fat and some vegan amino acids, but so keeping my body super, super alkaline. But I teach people, listen to your body. I have lots of clients who eat cleanly sourced meat, and chicken and fish. So, I have people who eat starch. I really encourage people, listen to what your body's telling you. Because right now, my body couldn't eat all fruit, and I don't need to detox.
Right.
Anymore. My body's in a different place. But when I was very sick, I had to my gut had to heal first before I could even eat fruit. And then I was starting to add fruit. And the more fruit I was able to add, the more it was helping me with healing. But it's very different. Most doctors don't touch on diet. And if they do, it's often the foods to avoid, and they're not working on alkalizing, right? It's often keto, paleo, carnivore. For someone like me who was sick for so long, you need plant-based nutrients for repair work, for cellular repair. So I don't think when people are eating carnivore, you're not getting that same high level of plant-based nutrients. You can have meat and incorporate the plant-based nutrients, but plant-based nutrients that are regeneratively farmed, not just organic, the regenerative farms, the soil follows certain practices. So the nutrient density of the soil is very high, where most of our farms, 99%, very depleted. So then our food's more depleted of nutrients. So if you can Google like a regenerative farm near you, you can buy produce from that's grown on that farm. And I use superfood shakes that are regeneratively farmed that come in a powder that you add water to. And it's like you're getting 6 superfood salads in a shake. So it's very nourishing, giving you all your micronutrients, but it's also very alkaline. And we're not feeding parasites and viruses and bacteria, and we're helping to support with those nutrients, those detox pathways in the liver. So it's interesting. I mean, that's how I got started, and my healing journey was with this regenerative nutrition protocol. And that's all I did for 3 months. And in 3 months, I went from struggling to walk to starting to be able to walk. I was at the chiropractor 4 times a week for 8 years due to the inflammation from toxicity. 3 months out with this protocol, I didn't need the chiropractor at all. Was I detoxing? Yes. Was I having symptoms? Yes. I was health coaching as I was healing, and my brain fog at 3 months had totally lifted. Staying in the same environment that had low levels of toxic mold, doing some basic remediation to, make the environment better. And I just got better and better. At 23 months, my doctor said I had reversed everything. I actually started to detox really deeply after that point, and I was a little surprised because I thought I'm no longer on 20 drugs for 20 years. So I wasn't even detoxing mold anymore. I was detoxing all the things I had been on. So my journey actually got harder after I was told I was well, because my body was letting go of so much, at once. But I knew that there was nothing wrong, and that I just needed to support my body in that. And I did end up bringing in like cell core binders, but muscle testing was very, very helpful to determine how much binder did I need to help me. And I was always needing very high doses of binder. It was never like 2 to 4. It would be like 90 pills a day. It was really crazy high doses that I've needed on the healing journeys. But the muscle testing helped me to hone in on what binder's best and how much. So I'm pretty addicted to muscle testing.
It brings up something that when you were talking, I started thinking to myself, well, so as far as, just opinion with you, if somebody's built up all these toxins, let's say for 15, 20 years, is it much harder for them to detox versus somebody that was heavily exposed on the environmental side, or would you say it's similar? Does that make sense?
No, I think that the detox process is the same, right? We have to open up pathways Something I say that I don't hear doctors say is I'm also trying to nourish and alkalize because that's going to help with detox, but you don't typically hear physicians say that. And then I'm gently detoxing and I'm doing it with food. And if I need to bring in a binder, I tend to bring in a whole food binder unless somebody muscle tests for like Welchol or cholestyramine, because those can be very depleting, right? And they're much more focused on binding mycotoxins, not other toxins as well. But we're not just dealing with the mycotoxins in the body. People are going to feel better once that whole load comes down. And it doesn't matter if it's a heavy metal or a mycotoxin or a pesticide. They're going to start feeling better as the load, comes down.
So when our listeners are, and this comes up all the time when I ask the medical side, most people just want to jump to charcoal. But you keep talking about, different types of things that they can take. So when they go to Amazon or wherever they're buying their stuff, like what are they looking for? Like just because it says organic, it's good?
Binders are funny. Like I love muscle testing for binders just because I don't have to know what kind of mold's in your body. If I can muscle test what your body wants, what you need at that moment, right? We're going to figure out, and that's going to change over the course of the healing journey, what you need. Because like I said, you're not just you're not just binding mycotoxins.
Right.
Charcoal is a binder that I use it more for like when people are having issues in the gut, right? Or they're having die-off in the gut, bacterial die-off, parasite. There are a lot of binders out there, GI Detox, Mycopol, that have charcoal in it and then have a combination of different binders. I love Cellcore for me, like that's what my body wanted. I went through almost all of the Cellcore products over time. So when people work with me, like I will muscle test what binder they want because it's going to be more effective if you do that. Okay. A lot of doctors will do like the mycotoxin urine test and you'll see what's leaving the body. And so they'll match the binder to the mold, the mycotoxins that's leaving the body. But to me, it's not the approach I use because there's more leaving the body than the mycotoxins.
Right.
And it doesn't, and for some people need to see it. They need to see that mycotoxin urine test and that there's mycotoxins leaving their body. But I've had some people who are so sick and their pathways are so congested that the doctor orders that test and it comes back negative because they're not detoxing.
Right.
So it may confuse them. So I'd rather do muscle testing or frequency testing or blood work if people need to see that they're being exposed, to mold. If you're in it, it's in your body. And if you can detox it, then it's in your body. But even those of us who can detox it, we shouldn't be exposed to toxic mold, right? It's adding to the body's burden of what it has to deal with. So I don't understand the testing. The functional world does a lot of testing. The testing is there, I think, to give people peace of mind. But most of the times when I've seen people, they've already done all the testing. I know how to help them. We don't need to keep testing. And we can test if people need reassurance that things are improving, along the way.
That's interesting because I feel the same way on the home side of things. Because if you spend all this money in testing, it's almost, like you said, depending on what test you do, to me, it's confirmation bias. And I'm big on not doing a whole bunch of testing because it gets so expensive. And what do you trust? Like, it's difficult.
Well, and the bottom line is what people need to know is their environment a safe place to heal, right? Bottom line. So that's what they need to know. And there are certain numbers if somebody's doing an ERMI or an EMA that like my levels were sort of questionable. My Hertz Me Too at the time was an 8. For people who know Hertz Me Too is above a 15 is get out. Under a 10, it depends on the person. And I had a lot of colleagues who had mold toxicity tell me to get out and to leave all my belongings. And I had been working with mold clients, hundreds of them, looking at people's ERMIs going, my clients' ERMIs are 15 to 30. So I just felt led to keep doing what I was doing because I saw that I was improving. I got rid of my cane and my walker and like all those things within 6 months. So I'm like, yes, I'm being exposed, but I'm doing stuff so my body's getting rid of what I'm being exposed to on a daily basis. So whether you're young or my age or older, you can get well, but you have to address your pathways. You have to address toxicity. You have to rebuild and repair the body. And so cellular nourishment, alkalinity is huge. Like I said, you don't have to give up things you love, but if you're doing 80% healthy, whole food, right? That's going to be much healthier. I don't recommend dairy when people are healing. Highly inflammatory, highly acidic, mucus forming. When most of us who've been exposed to mold, we have like sinus congestion, lung congestion. My asthma totally, I had 20 labels of illnesses. They were all reversed with this approach. My asthma went away like in 3 months, and I had asthma since I was 3. And 50% of asthmatics, part of the root is often mycotoxin exposure. Right. And docs don't know that. I didn't know that as a health coach or a dietitian. I had no idea.
Well, something I always bring up, when I bring someone else onto the podcast, it's so important to have the right people, a coach like yourself, somebody on the home side, because if you have the wrong people, you're probably not going to improve. And you brought up something that I hear from my clients all the time. Your ERMI score, or Hurts Me Too, was like a 9 or a 10. And some professionals out there, and it could be on the environmental side or the medical side, say, oh, you got to leave. Well, I understand that, but at what point do you just keep up and moving to a new home? Because you went into a new home and you're still getting that score. So it's interesting to hear that.
And my score is like, my score was an 8, and people are just different. I have some friends, they walk into my house and they react immediately, and it's very disconcerting. But I always tell people we're all different. I react when the levels are higher. Like typically, I'll go into places and I can see visible signs of water damage, and I'll muscle test that I'm being exposed to mycotoxins at a moderate level. But my house is a low level and I seem to do fine. But other places I have had been in a hotel and had insomnia my entire vacation, because it took me 4 or 5 days to go, oh my gosh, there's water damage in the hotel room. And I just didn't see it. I wasn't looking up at the ceiling and I wasn't thinking to muscle test. And I had insomnia. I was up all night urinating. Those are sort of my symptoms. And then I had shortness of breath and trouble breathing. And I get that when I go into people's homes, without knowing what kind of mold or what I'm being exposed to. But everybody's different, and clients know their own body. But often just leaving the environment, people will improve, but it's not enough typically to get well, especially if you've been in the environment, a while, not just a day or 2. So a lot of people think, oh, I left the environment, I should be fine. Well, but all those toxins are still in your body. Exactly. And if you're the population that doesn't detox, you need more help and more support getting those things to move out of your body.
Yeah, that brings up a good point that I bring this up all the time, but mold exposure affects all of us differently. And, sometimes people like yourself, you're going to have a lot more symptoms versus maybe your husband or your son. And it brings up a good point where, for our listeners, they should understand that just because only one person in the home is sick, it doesn't mean that they're not having problems. It's kind of crazy how that works, because from what you're saying, your husband and your son, they had some symptoms, but not too much.
I didn't connect it till later. My husband worked full time while I was really sick and disabled, but he had rashes. He gained weight. He could not lose. He had all this hormone metabolic syndrome. My son had life-threatening food allergies. He had colitis, was diagnosed with colitis and blood work that showed Crohn's, severe asthma, sinus infections, ever since he was a little guy. Very underweight, can't put weight on, still that way as an adult. And now I realize, we were all affected by the water leak in our house in Pennsylvania. I'm the only one who's done blood work, but I muscle test that we all have CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. My son's been in numerous apartments as an adult that have had water leaks. My husband, we've reversed, he's detoxed. His buckets are empty. There's still some layers he's healing, because we were both exposed a really long time. It wasn't like 2 years. I was exposed 50-something years. And so I tell people, don't compare your journey to somebody else's, but mold isn't good for anyone. And when I talk to families, if one person is sick, a lot of times if I ask questions, well, how are your kids doing? Do they have insomnia, bedwetting? Are they peeing often? How is their digestion? How are their bowels? You start asking questions, and then you start finding out, well, yeah, they have symptoms too, but the person who's the sickest and most limited, right, is the one that they're focused on. But there's usually work to do for everybody. but sometimes the person who's sickest, right? That takes a little bit more intention. Kids bounce back so much quicker, I find, than adults. They're so resilient. The older we are, we're just a little less resilient, and there's more in our system that we've been exposed to.
So as we wrap this up, you have, and I have several different links. I have a Calendly link for you, which is your free discovery call, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I offer a free complimentary discovery call if somebody is looking for help supporting them on the journey of restoring their health, just to see if we're a good fit. I do some muscle testing of your basic loads so we can just sort of see where you are on the journey. And it's a chance, for you to understand how I work and just see if it feels right.
Yeah, because it's interesting that you say it that way. There's some people that aren't a good fit for me. It's just, maybe we don't agree on certain things. But like I said, as we wrap this up, I want our listeners to know that I'm going to put the description for your Calendly link, you have a story on YouTube, a Linktree link, your website, which is Health Coaching by Heather, and your Facebook page. So as we wrap up, what do you want to tell our listeners what you can do for them?
I can help you restore your health. I mean, you're going to have to do the work, but I'm there to come alongside you and guide you in the process and help figure out what's the right approach and protocol, for you and what fits in your budget and prioritize it. It is a process to get better. People should be willing to commit, 90 days to start to see things really start to shift. But it is a process that it typically takes longer than that to heal fully. But people should be, feeling better, and they have to want to get better and want to finish the process and not stop in the middle. But I want to be there to guide you and come alongside you and cheer you on.
Perfect. Well, as we wrap up, obviously, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule for coming on to the Toxic Mold Podcast. So on behalf of myself and all of our listeners, we would like to thank you, Heather. For our listeners, I will put all of these links in the description, and have a great week.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you go to our website at cnccontractorservices.com and sign up for the mold investigation checklist. Again, go to cnccontractorservices.com and get your free mold investigation checklist today. You can also, on cnccontractorservices.com, find out more about Steve's courses and books and consultations. Once again, go to cnccontractorservices.com.